Well, hello there, terrible warriors. I'm Justin Eacock, and it's wonderful to see you again. We are doing something a little bit different. Last week we did our first Session 0, and this week we're doing our first Spotlight episode. And we'll see. Maybe there'll be a schedule we'll do one on, one off, or not. I'm really making it up as I go along. Today, I wanted to introduce you what I'm doing with the Spotlight. If you remember last year, I did a little bit of Meet the Devs where we talked to people who made the games that we're playing. And that's great, and I hope I get to keep doing that. But part of these spotlights is a little bit different. As you know, we're not playing games on the podcast this year. We're going to be doing like creating characters and talking about games. So I wanted to give it an opportunity to spotlight other shows that are out there that are doing actual play content that you could subscribe to and listen to so you can get some really fun entertaining times, because I know how much you miss that, and I know how much you miss the Terrible Warriors doing that. And while we're trying something different, I wanted to highlight some other places that you can go to where you could go and listen to these shows. And so, for our first spotlight, as you can already see in today's episode name, I am here with Kieran Bennett from For Crits and Giggles. Hello there, Kieran.
Hello, Justin. Oh my God, I'm finally on the show. This is so exciting.
We're finally on that show. And, like, you're all the way out in New Zealand, so I think you also get the record of, like, the longest, furthest transmission we've ever had on the podcast. We've talked to people in Sweden and in the UK and all across the US, but, yeah, I think it would have to be, like, Japan and New Zealand would be, like, the farthest we could reach, so.
Absolutely. I think I worked it out that from Canada, it's about... Oh, I don't know what it is in kilometers.
I know when I looked in Microsoft Flight Simulator where I wanted to fly from my airport over your house, I looked at that and went, that's too much time. I don't have that much time.
Yeah. It's. I think it's like 11,000 miles.
That's if you fly directly and you break how planes fly.
Yeah. I when I went to the US last year, I flew from New York to San Francisco, so like East Coast to West Coast, and then to New Zealand. It took over 20 hours for the whole trip.
Where when I go fly, even like I always say, like Ireland is like where I'm originally from, where my family lives. Like that's a 6-hour flight from Toronto to Dublin. Like that's a movie. That's a Lord of the Rings extended edition and a nap, and you're
exactly.
And to fly to your location would be the Lord of the Rings extended trilogy plus a full night's rest.
Yeah. Oh my God. So not last year, but the year before, there was actually a guy who was sitting 2 rows in front of me who, so this is the flight from Auckland to LA, which I think is about like 14 and a bit hours. So it's decently long. It's like watch a couple of movies, try and get some sleep because it's supposed to be nighttime. But this dude who was 2 rows in front of me, because I can never sleep on planes, so I was awake the whole time. And this dude 2 rows in front of me watched Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, Return of the King, and then Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, Return of the King, started the Fellowship of the Ring again, and then we arrived. And I was like, you madman, you absolute crazy person.
Yeah, wow. So this is just, I guess, what happens too whenever you talk to anyone from North America, is it just immediately gets into talking about the scale of the Earth.
Always.
Always. Just like Canadians always talking about the weather. Now, full disclosure before we get into it, For Crits and Giggles is your actual play 5th edition podcast. I've also been an editor on your show for the last like dozen or so episodes. I think it goes back to like 40 something is when I started, and which almost just over a year. I don't remember the exact date when I started.
I feel like it's a year. I feel like you started like a third-ish the way through our second season, and then have been doing it since then. Honestly,
it was right when it was right as you arrived at the Stolid Rock is when I.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. That's I think that's about like episode 20 or so.
Yeah, and so tell me. I know obviously about Crits and Giggles because I got the inside knowledge, but my dear listener has never heard of you before. So tell me a bit about like not just the stuff that I've been a part of, which honestly is the best stuff. You should just start there.
Of course.
But tell me about like how did For Crits and Giggles start? What is it about? What can we expect when we start listening to your story? Because it has gone places.
Well, to answer your very first question,
I guess also to frame that, every actual play podcast kind of has their own spin on what that means to them. Some are Terrible Warriors, much more live to tape, sitting around the table without a lot of editing. Others, like I think of Red Moon role playing, are almost like straight up radio dramas with almost no mention of the game at all that they're playing. So kind of where on that do you fit? Like, how do you define an actual play podcast? Right?
Now, interesting question. So to answer your first question, how did For Crits and Giggles actually start? So the very first podcast I ever listened to was at the time it was called Drunks and Dragons. Now it's called Greeting Adventures from the Geekly Inc. podcast network. And I listened to like a bunch of episodes of that, and I really enjoyed it. And I was like, wow, this sounds really fun. Like I should totally do a podcast as well, because like why the fuck not, right? And some friends of mine, we were all going to start playing a D&D game because we'd all, we all had jobs and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, we can just play online, like through like a video chat, and that'll be a way that we can just keep playing D&D with each other. And I think we should make it a podcast. And it's interesting that you ask, like, where does it kind of fall, like, on that spectrum, or like, how do you kind of define it? Because when we first started, the idea was that it would be like a very kind of like, welcome to our table. You're sitting here with us playing it's like you're playing the game with us. And so, it was very like, welcome to the show. Here we're going to play some games and let's talk about like the rules and the dice rolls. And, we kept like the clatter of the dice and the table and stuff in the show. And as it kind of went along, it I think ended up developing into more of like, I don't want to say it's like full radio drama, because it's definitely not. That would be a very disingenuous label, but it is definitely more like with like sound effects and music.
It's an improvised drama.
Yeah. It's an improvised radio drama. Yeah. And
you started incorporating music and sound effects and with the sword swing sounds when they attack an enemy. And yeah. I know from Terrible Warriors, one thing we keep switching our games every month in the past, and so it made sense to keep referring to the rules. But when we did our Star Trek Adventures one, which is one of our more rare long form games, by the time you get into like the 8, 9, or 10 hour, keep talking about the same rules over and over and over again just starts to feel more and more redundant. And I think that's true for actual groups that are playing with their friends. Is the longer you play with a single game, the more comfortable everyone gets, and a lot of the rules just become secondhand, and the pace of the game just begins to speed up.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I feel like when we first started, it was. I think the kind of approach that we were sort of aiming for was like, oh, we'll explain the rules as we go so that like people will understand what we're doing. And then I think kind of as time went on, we sort of realized, well, who cares? I don't think people are necessarily listening to our show in particular because they want like a robust examination of D&D, because we don't really know.
Did you imagine that perhaps the people that were listening at the beginning may have been introduced to Dungeons and Dragons for the first time through your show? Or did you just eventually accept that likely a lot of your listeners are already listening to other similar shows and they get it?
Yeah, I think when we started, it was like, oh, people are going to be introduced to D&D like through our show. And then kind of as we went along, I think we sort of realized like this isn't really great content, because it wasn't like we were presenting it in a really amazing way or anything. We were just sort of saying like, oh, well, I'm going to roll this and add this so that I can do that. But that's not very interesting. So we just kind of instead moved to like, more descriptions and more narrative descriptions, and just kind of let it fall by the wayside, figuring like, people will know what we mean. Like it doesn't, it doesn't really matter.
One of the revelations I found doing Terrible Warriors was originally I had it planned, because we started like at some long ass time, like before actual play podcasts were like a thing that people accepted. Even like podcasting was still kind of in its infancy. And so when we started, it was very much an idea that, our friends are going to listen, they're going to get it. But some even our friends don't know what we're playing. And because we were changing the games every month, it also meant that yeah, we were introducing brand new games to brand new people who might not even know what tabletop is, but just liked the people that were performing on the show. They either knew them from their own personal channels. When the show first started, we had a lot of different people who had like their own Twitch channel, their own other podcasts. It was kind of like a super group that was coming together, like a Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young thing, where they all had their own thing.
The Crosby,
but then they all
Stills,
came
Nash and
together
Young of podcasting,
right? Well, it kind of had that super group feel of that, and then over the years, it's morphed into, still having, I think, in that DNA of introducing something new to players, but now realizing through our Patreon support and through Discord and getting to know our listeners, a lot of them are running their own games and are discovering which games to run by listening to podcasts like mine and maybe podcasts like yours, and that my listeners weren't even players, they were other GMs. Yeah. And that really changed the approach, where I was spending a little bit more time pulling back the curtain and letting the listener know what the GM was doing, less what the player experience was like, because it was more about equipping them now
to know how to run those games.
To know how to run and give them ideas to overcome, common hiccups and stumbles and roadblocks and challenges that a GM will face when your players take you off the rails.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting revelation for me, but I know that's not true for a lot of, I think the listenership that would listen to a show like Critical Role would be primarily players, not
Absolutely,
GMs,
yeah.
right?
Yeah,
and it's a very different demographic. Those people aren't listening, so did you have any similar thoughts with For Crits and Giggles, or has it just been you just goofing around with your friends and it's just fun when people listen in? Because that's legitimate as well, right? That's
It is one of those things. Like, I think when we started, it was a very, and I kind of curse us for having this approach when we first started, where it was very much like, we'll just record it and kind of see what happens. Like, who cares? Like, we're just bumming around and having a bit of fun, and that's fine. But I think as it kind of went along and we actually, got numbers and people were leaving reviews and being like, oh, this is really fun and you guys are telling a great story, we kind of changed our approach a little bit and we're like, oh, people are actually listening to this. We should probably think about, what we're kind of putting in our episodes and what we're saying and kind of how we're presenting and stuff. And so it did kind of, it changed, I guess, when we realized people were actually listening.
Did you become more
to it.
Socially conscious?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There are, we've changed, because we've been doing it for, as of like 2 days ago, we've been recording for like 5 years.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So we're recording and putting out episodes for 5 years. And I think when people say, oh, what's your podcast called? And I say, For Crits and Giggles, I say, like, start from season 2, because season 1 has like some good episodes and some really great moments. And, like, it has a lot of story in it that I think is really great. But like the people that we were while we were playing those games, like, are not the people that we are now. Like, even just myself personally, I was like, I'm 27 now, so I was 21, 22 when we started. I am not the same person.
You were a child.
I was a child, yeah. Like, I look back and I'm just like, oh my God, shut up. Stop podcasting.
I think that's a general challenge for just podcasting in as a whole, is that first episode is forever and always the first impression. No matter how much your show ends up evolving over time, it's kind of the same as like old web comics. People go to the website and they click first, and they go back 15 years to no, they're a different artist now. Yeah. And one thing, at least with Terrible Warriors, because we're not serialized like Crits and Giggles, I was able to, for a time, like, retire or vault old episodes, and so the first episode is actually a newer one. But then I started getting messages going like, oh, what happened to these? I always listen. I go back and listen to these ones over and over again. And I'm like, why? Why would you do that? Those are not good. But there's a nostalgic and a feel to it. So I've recently put them all back. Like, every episode is back up and available again, and just being like, whatever. Just let people. Some people will start with the new stuff. Some people will start with the old stuff.
Yeah.
and let it be what it is. Now, what was it like 5 years of doing an actual play with, relatively speaking, I think except for one exception, the same cast?
Yes.
How did you do that? Because Terrible Warriors, we're like SNL. We change our cast every season because we can't retain anybody. How do you do that?
Well, I mean, I think when we started, it was quite, again, because I said, like, I think we kind of expected, as with most podcasts, you know, we would upload a few episodes, no one would listen, and we would stop doing it. That was kind of our expectation. But people were listening, and people seemed to like it, so we just kind of kept going. But the cast when we started was myself, my partner at the time, my best friend from high school, another friend of mine from high school, and someone that I worked with and I was friends with through university as well. And all 5 of us, we all knew each other and we all hung out like all the time. So, you know, when it came to making a D&D group, it just made sense, and making a podcast, it just made sense. And then my partner, she left the show. And you say, like, how did you do that? I mean, we didn't really. It's been really difficult.
You've had people move countries.
Yeah. So
like most recently.
Yeah, myself and Agilan, we both still live in New Zealand. But Nick, who's one of their other cast members, he lives in Melbourne, Australia. And then Sam actually lives in Doha, out in the Middle East, working for Al Jazeera. So he moved away like a year ago. Nick moved away like a year ago as well. And then there was actually a period as well, just when we were getting season 2 kind of off the ground, where myself, my ex-partner, Sam, and Nick, we were all in New Zealand, and then Agilan was in South Africa and the UK, traveling back and forth for work.
You mentioned at the end of this, because you've just wrapped up this current season.
Just wrapped season 2.
I don't even know if it's actually been released yet, but I know I've finished editing it. And
yes,
so you mentioned that I guess it was Agilan that was moving and was going to be traveling so often that your plan for this season's arc was going to be the removal of his character. From the story, either dying or ascending or whatever would happen. And that obviously didn't happen.
No, because so basically we had finished season 1, and I was like, hey, I've got like this rough idea for season 2, and we ended up having like we had like a cast meeting, essentially, I guess, where we were talking about season 2 and like what do we want to get out of it, what do we want to kind of put into it, sort of thing, and what sort of format do we think it should follow. And we had a big discussion about, like, you know, how we think the episode should be structured and how we could basically be better at what we were doing, which was great, and I loved it. And then Agilan actually said to us at the time, hey, in probably about like 6 months or so, I'm going to be shipped off to South Africa for this job that I have. So I don't know if I'll really be able to like join you guys like every week, because we were playing like every single week, if not like every other week. You know, we were playing all the time. And so I was like, that's cool. What would you guys think about maybe the point of the season being like Mordai leaves at the end, so that you don't have to kind of worry about it. You can come back later if you want, but it means that we can kind of, you know, move on, essentially. And he was like, yeah, that's a really great idea. And so kind of had this big plan, and we're like, cool, okay, we've got 6 months, great, that's enough episodes, we can totally do this. A month later, the people who was working for it were like, we said 6 months, what we meant was 1, you are leaving on the weekend. And so he was gone, immediately. Yeah, it was really bad. It was really bad. And he hated it there. And I think he actually quit the job after about 7 or 8 months. Which was like good for him, good for us. So yeah, it was I say to a lot of people, like the season 2 that we just finished, it doesn't look anything like what we planned. And I like the endings maybe a little bit similar, but the overall structure of the season does not resemble what we had planned, like, at all. It looks totally different.
You're my inaugural spotlight episode, and I hope to do this with other AP shows out there. And I want to know also, like, about their story. And I probably should have started with, like, tell me about, like, where does For Crits and Giggles take place? What is the story? What's the synopsis? What's the pitch here?
No, you didn't. No, you did actually ask me that at the start, and I just.
And I'm also very curious, because you just mentioned it. Is how scripted, I say in quotes, is this because some shows they go in with no plan. They just go in with the game. And others very much have a storyboard figured out. And it's more of, I don't want to say, it's kind of like just simulating the experience of a role-playing game. Because they're still going to go, it's more like Curb Your Enthusiasm than it is, whose line is it anyway?
I get what you mean. So For Crits and Giggles is set in a world called Eannis, which is like a fantasy world that I have created, full of gods that I have created, and your classic kind of fantasy races and lots of magic and strange devices and weird characters, and takes a lot of influence from essentially the stories that I loved when I was growing up.
So you're playing Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, but the setting is an original setting.
Yes. I mean, the setting is an original setting in that, like, a lot of the things about it, I suppose, I would consider original.
So is there like a Lord of the Rings appendix at the back of the For Crits and Giggles book that you have like the breakdowns of all of the deities and the cultures and the histories of this world?
We actually have a website, for critsandgiggles.com, and on there is like a lore section of the website where you can actually look at descriptions of all the gods, a lot of the main cities, some of the races, and I'm still writing up a lot of this stuff because a lot of it's all kind of collected in like loose notes in some notebooks that I have and Word documents that I have.
Yeah,
so
you're like Tolkien, just writing things down and throwing them all over the place, and your descendants can figure them out later.
Essentially, I have notes like within plans for episodes where I've been like, oh, don't forget that dwarves primarily exist by eating metal, and they love to garnish their foods with exotic salts. And so I'll write that as a note in like an episode plan, and then like 6 months later I'll go, oh, what did I write about dwarves? Oh fuck, and I have to go and search through all my episode plans to try and find this like one sentence that I've written to double check what I actually made canon in my own show.
So how much do you have written then as you're going into each episode?
It depends. Like in an ideal world where I've kind of hit the mark of like, this is what I like to do, I'll normally have like maybe like 3 or 4 pages written. In terms of like, not just for one episode. It'll normally be for like that episode and probably like the next episode, because we always kind of end on like a, next time on Dragon Ball Z sort of thing, where it's like, there's a cliffhanger and something is going to happen next. And I just, as a storyteller, find it very difficult to like set up the current story if I don't know where it's going to be going after that, or kind of like what the overall sort of plan is. So when I'm planning, say I'm planning episode 1, if I don't know what's going to happen in episode 2 or maybe like episode 3, I find it quite hard to plan episode 1 because I'll want to start kind of setting up what's going to happen in the future in that episode 1.
So that's so interesting I know there's obviously a lot of GMs out there who are, I guess, primarily writers, really, and they do so much writing and prep work, even so far as scripting out what certain descriptions of areas would be, or what people are planning to say when you eventually meet them, versus, I've always been like fly by wire, where I have maybe 3 lines written down of like hour 1, a thing in the sky. Hour 2, everything's on fire. Hour 3, solution, and then I see what happens. But also different in that I've primarily spent the last several years doing 4-hour one-shots, which are like very different kinds of experience, where they're much more boom, 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 and we're done. Where you've got a slow burn going on some of your arcs that you're working years in advance.
One might say too slow, but yeah.
So tell me about the world of Eannis as the camera is panning in over on the movie trailer.
Sure. So I suppose Eannis is a world of like fantastical magic and gods. The kind of primary tenet behind this place is that the gods are real and they have an influence on the world, and their presence can be felt everywhere, and several thousand
people regularly see them.
Yeah, like not like every day, but it is definitely, if someone told you that they saw one, you would quite easily believe them. That it happens quite often. Very, very Greek Roman gods sort of thing, and so many thousands and thousands of years ago, they existed on the world, and everything was sort of peaceful. And then there was a war between the gods and between everyone who lived on this world, and that kind of conflict and that hatred gave birth to a god of chaos, which burst through the world itself and kind of destroyed a large part of it. And so they all kind of banded together, defeated this threat, and then had to leave the world so as to not kind of bring imbalance to the world again. And so the kind of, I guess, core underlying problem of For Crits and Giggles is that the world has been pretty good for a while, but the god's presence has been really waning in the last little while. And so that's kind of throwing things off kilter even more, because it's a very fantasy but very literal world, wherein if it's like the sun is pulled across the sky by the god of the sun, who ties ropes around the sun and drags it on his back, that's not a metaphor. That's the thing that literally happens. So
there's a bit of like Discworld logic that goes on in here as well.
Yeah.
If they say the world is flat and on a turtle's back, it literally is.
It really is. Yeah. I always really enjoyed when I was a kid, like the Greek and Roman myths and legends about
Helios's chariot and that being the actual sun.
Yeah, and so to go to Helios, it's like, yeah, like wouldn't it be cool if it's like Helios dragged the sun across the sky in his chariot? But like if you look up and you were able to go up there, you could actually see a man in a chariot dragging it across the sky. And so a lot of the kind of lore and magic in For Crits and Giggles is built around that kind of idea, where it's like, this is kind of silly and very fantastical and very magical, but it's real. But it's real and it exists, and people know about it.
And the overarching mystery, now did this start at the beginning, that like at this point where we are, when I joined, the gods are gone? Kind of like no one knows where they. It's like it's a big whodunit, missing persons, except it's all of them, and just the pantheon have just gone away, and no one knows why or what those repercussions are. Was that right from the start? Was that like the hook?
I think that was kind of the hook from. This is going to sound really weird. I think it was the hook from like episode 3 or 4. I think like episode 1 and 2, it was going to be more of sort of like a Cthulhu-esque sort of thing. And then there was a period where, like very shortly, where because we were weekly, back in the day. And then there was going to be a period where it's like, oh, we can't play this week because, such and such is doing this and such is doing that. And I was like, okay, cool. Oh, I'll do like a lore episode where I talk about kind of like, all these gods and the history and stuff. And so I sat down and was kind of writing, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this instead. The gods are disappearing, blah, blah, blah. So the first couple episodes, it's not really there. But I think after that, it is kind of being set up and it's going to be a thing. And yeah.
And so we've got now 3 main characters, the boys, who have really taken charge. Tell me a bit about, like, we've got the setting, but that's only, like, we also need our fellowship, right? We need our characters. Who are you going to meet when you join For Crits and Giggles and hang out with them for a few hours each episode?
Well, I mean, I suppose the main people that you'll be hanging out with are Mithras, who is a very murderous elf, played by my friend Nick.
Yeah, but he's a reformed thief.
He's a reformed thief, yes. He's reformed in that he's decided that thievery is not for him. But murder is fine.
Yeah,
murder
he just reformed the wrong way.
He reformed the wrong way. Yeah, yeah. So he's very about, like, bows and precise shots and doing the job right. Whether the job is morally acceptable.
He's that player. He's that player at every D&D game who really, really wants to describe the killing blow every time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every single time.
We've all known a player like that.
We've all known a player like that, and yes, that is Mithras through and through. And so then we also have Mordai, who is a tiefling druid, and then there's a little bit of a change later, but he's a druid for most of it. And he's searching for his old.
Even with the
searching for his
change, I think
old
it's easy to
master.
say he's a mystical character.
He is a mystical character. Yeah. You should describe the characters, and I'll just agree because you're doing a better job than I am. Because I keep wanting to just describe because like this
It's
was
hard
kind of
because you've been with them for so long, but,
Right,
but it's been for so long for you that you also forget some of the eldest details.
Absolutely. Like it's yeah. So he's definitely more of a mystical character, and I think in terms of what you'll get with him, he's very understated, very dry, but really willing to just get in amongst it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then the last of the boys is Poe, who is a Kinharian monk, and a Kinharian is a human from in our campaign, and Poe is he is actually reformed the correct way. He used to be a captain of the guard, a very violent man, lots of swords, and he ended up taking a vow of peace.
It almost sounds like a war criminal at some points. Like some of the descriptions get rough.
If you're thinking of Iroh from Avatar: The Last Airbender, you might be correct, but I'm not going to confirm that for intellectual property reasons.
But he led armies and he led campaigns. He led massacres.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, he is. I would definitely say he is the one with like the worst backstory, but it is now definitely a very calming kind of figure and a very grounded character at times.
Yeah, and only blunt weapons, I believe now.
Only blunt weapons, no blades, no swords.
Yeah, no blades, no swords. Sit down and have some tea instead of fight it out.
Loves a good cup of tea. Yeah.
And they've all gone through changes over the years. What have been some of your favorite highlights with them? Like when you just think of like the big moment that shows up in like the recap episode or the trailer that really stands out for you.
Okay, so this would not show up in the trailer, but one of the bits that I always think about, which I find just really amazing, is Poe and Mithras are trying to retrieve information about the Golden Blades, which are a kind of a militia organization dedicated to the freedom of tieflings. And they're in the city of Fernshire, which is built atop a giant pillar of rock, and they're trying to chase down this guy who they think has information, and they're pursuing him on a black horse, and the tiefling that they're chasing dives underneath a wagon and runs out the other side. And so instead of jumping the horse over the top, they decide to skid the horse underneath the wagon and make it out the other side. And I think about that. It lives rent-free in my head. I think about it all the time. But in terms of like the big moments that would make the trailer, our season 1 finale was very dramatic in that we had like a twist at the end, which obviously I won't spoil, but I actually genuinely managed to surprise a couple of them with the twist, and I was very, very happy about that. But as you say, like they go through like a lot of different stuff, and so I think for me, one of the really important things was that I think the first season is very much like it's a mystery. There's a couple episodes beforehand where they're not in one place, but once they make it to Fernshire, they're kind of hunting around and searching for the culprit behind who implanted these memories in their mind and who made them do these horrible things. And then the second season, we wanted to be a lot more cross country, and so they start in Fernshire and very quickly parade their way down the country, encountering various horrible things and monsters, and there's a great series of episodes, I think it was just before you joined us, where they arrive in a village, and this 1,000-year-old plague that has not been seen in the world for a long time has suddenly resurfaced, and they find this creature called a caretaker of Salam Thur, which are like these horrible kind of nurse-like creatures which perceive everyone as being horribly ill. And so they will actually cause people to become ill and then, quote unquote, take care of them in these sort of macabre mansions that twist and shape to kind of suit what you would perceive to be like the best care to possibly receive. And so they arrive and they're all dressed in their finest outfits, and they have to kind of go through this horrible mansion that's constantly like presenting them with visions from the past and people that they miss and care about. And so they go from that and they end up in a tower in the sky, and they visit a village full of cat people, and then they go to a city full of dead people. And it's, we wanted there to be a lot more movement, I suppose, go to a lot more different places.
At this point, you probably also had like a big map of Yanis in your head now, and you just,
yes,
you wanted to, like, we can't just spend our whole times in
one city,
in one little area. Like we do need to start jumping around. I am curious to know, in some criticism of other shows, not yours and not mine, is that especially with Dungeons and Dragons, sometimes the only agency a player has to decide what happens in a scene is when they succeed at a die roll to attack an enemy, and they could describe how they killed them. And that's kind, and then the rest is really up to the GM to describe what is happening and where they're going, and it's very on rails. How much agency does Poe, Mordai, and Mithras have in your story to decide those outcomes beyond just, as we already mentioned, that's what gave me this thought of the way Mithras gets really, really graphic with his executions.
I think that would be like a kind of a two-pronged answer in a way. I think on the one hand, I always try and consider when I'm kind of constructing the next bit of the story, or sort of considering what's going to happen next, is, and I think it's probably one of the most important questions you can consider as like a game master, is if my players weren't here, what would happen to the world without them? So if, we had the city of Fernshire and all the different pieces were still in place, but all of a sudden, overnight, the player characters just disappeared. What would then happen after that? And so I think keeping that in mind and then sort of turning over the decisions to them allows them to really kind of influence things beyond that, because they may decide, we want to go and check out this warehouse. And so you think to yourself, okay, they're going to go to the warehouse. That's great. But what is going to happen over here, and how is that going to kind of develop without them? And so they have agency over whatever it is they want to do. But I think as long as things are still changing and being dynamic around them and the decisions that they make, it feels like the world is alive and kind of responding to what it is that they do. And there have been a few occasions in season 1 and a little bit in season 2 where they've kind of decided to go and investigate something else, and I've had to just be like, okay, well, I guess we're just doing this now, and had to kind of come up with something very much on the fly, and then sort of develop something else kind of over in the corner, because I thought they were going to go and check it out, but they didn't. And so what's going to happen to that while they're not there?
So what was the biggest thing that you can think of what took your show off the rails, and what was your solution to it? Like, what was the biggest curveball that they threw you? They're like, that wasn't supposed to happen.
Gosh, they've never really they've never taken it completely off the rails. Obviously, now that I say that, as soon as we finish this episode, I'm going to think of 100 examples where things have gone way off the rails. But I would definitely say one of the biggest kind of surprises, I suppose, at the very, very end of season 1, the Golden Blades, who were kind of becoming a bit of a problem in the city of Fernshire, had gotten their hands on a canopic jar, which there are 72 of them in the world, and they are all filled with the vital organs of Salim Thur, who's the god of disease. And so they've all been cut out of this god thousands of years ago and put into these jars, and each one is like a horrible plague or disaster. And they finally retrieve this jar at the very end of season 1, and I was like, cool, they'll destroy it. They'll keep it. They'll pass it over to the authorities. Whatever. Who cares? I didn't really think about it. And then Salim Thur was kind of drawn to this jar, and he's like, give me back my organs. And Anya, who was the player played by my ex-partner, was like, here you go. I just gave it back to him. Before I could kind of say, like,
it's like Sauron showing up going, give me the ring. And you're like, sure, here's your ring.
I mean, essentially, yeah, that was kind of what it was like. And so then
Frodo just hands it over.
Basically, yeah. And so it kind of became this thing in the next season where I was like, well, I hadn't really planned on there being like a new disease in the world, but that's what I said would happen. So now that's a thing. And so that is why, for anyone who's just finished our second season, that's why there's a pandemic in the show. That is not a reflection.
It's not a reflection of the real world.
No, not at all.
Preordained like 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Yeah. Exactly.
So that's actually the origins of that never dying issue that they've got. And is that also related to, we got Borstov and the Rat. Is that connect? I know that's like your spin-offs when you don't have anyone else to do. And they're currently Skeleton Boys. Are they related to the same pandemic that's going on?
So the pandemic.
You're willing to spill the beans on that one?
I'm definitely willing to spill the beans on that one. So the pandemic that shows up, the red sickness, quote unquote, which in my mind is only called the red sickness because thousands of years ago, that probably sounded like a pretty original name for a disease, you know? So
it's like the Black Death. Yeah.
It's like the Black Death. Yeah. It's like, this is only the second disease we've ever found. So the red sickness was related to the canopic jar. And so that was kind of unleashed on the world. But everyone not dying is actually related to something else that we are going to be resolving I wouldn't say very shortly because our release schedule is
just
horrible,
a thing of like Helios's chariot and the sun is just like when the god of death isn't around, people don't get to die.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If the Grim Reaper is responsible for picking up the souls, what happens when the Grim Reaper just doesn't show up for work, you know?
Well, that's not good.
Yeah, it's not
good. Have you been waiting for one of your players to take a mortal blow just so you can show them how bad the state of the world is?
Yes.
Because if they get like someone like gets like a massive hit and they drop down dead and they're doing a death save and they fail the death save and then they just stay at the table.
Just alive. Yeah.
But they're like a life, like an unlife where their body might not even be
exactly
intact. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Good.
And then
little chills.
So Borstov and the Rat, actually. Season 1 was very much like episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like from 1 to the end kind of thing, 1 to 43. There were a couple backstory episodes near the end of the season, but it was pretty much the same from the beginning to the end. But season 2, as everyone's lives became significantly more complicated, we began adding again bonus episodes, and some of them were very short, and they were like little stories and things. And then we had Borstov and the Rat. Which
deserves its own show. I'm just gonna say.
Oh my god, I love Borstov and the Rat so much. So, Borstov and the Rat is GM'd by Gielan, who is actually like he's a really good GM. He's never done it before, but he's a really good GM. And then the two characters, Borstov and the Rat, are played by myself and Sam. And Borstov is a dwarven barbarian, and the Rat is a halfling bard, and they are both like just horrible bogans that kind of wander around basically just yelling at things and being
hooligan
white trash.
Blokes walking down the street just yelling at everyone as they come out of the pub at night. Like,
yeah, pretty much.
You know, they're just coming off for a fight right after the big, football match, and
yeah,
they're just the worst.
And as to whether or not they are involved in the god of death or the red sickness, I don't know. Gielan's telling the story.
Oh,
yeah,
you're in the dark about that. I'm gonna have to bring him on for the next spotlight.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, Borstov and the Rat is like go to our feed. I kind of want to reorder the feed a little bit later, but Borstov and the Rat is in amongst season 2. It's very funny, and not to toot my own horn, I'm in it, but it's really funny.
I laugh out loud. I think I've edited 3 episodes of them, and they're hysterically funny. I don't have to do much with the music in the background because they just carry the whole show. And I'm like, this, at the very least, it deserves to be like a web comic or something, because it's just, they're just, it's like Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Dungeons and Dragons at times. They're just the worst. And they're just super anti-heroes who are trying to do the right thing in all the wrong ways.
Yeah. They're very much like, I recognize what morals are, and I recognize what the right thing to do is, but it will inconvenience me, so I'm going to ignore it.
So like minor spoiler a little bit is they do become skeletons, and
yes,
that's like their arc. And there's a part where they are trying to pretend to not be skeletons by eating food that's been offered to them by someone they've met on the road.
I was going to mention
that. It just turns into one of the grossest, ultimate, most lowest common denominator humor that you can possibly commit to a podcast. And somehow the 3 of you no one ever says end scene, and it just keeps going way longer than it ever should have.
Yeah.
And it's like, it was perfect.
I was crying with laughter when we were doing that scene. I'll happily put my hand up right now and say I can sometimes have a very puerile sense of humor, and oh my god, eating the soup and having it obviously flush straight out the skeleton, so funny. Yeah. Go listen to more stuff on the right. It's very good.
So as we're getting close to the end here, and someone has sat through 48 minutes of us chatting about For Crits and Giggles, what's to look forward to? Like, you've got plans. Like, you've just finished up your newest season. You've got them going off really where they've never gone before. There was a real another good cliffhanger sense of doom. What do you hope for the future of For Crits and Giggles as you're going, like as not just as a GM, but also as a podcast and as a game? Like, what are we in for?
What are we looking forward to? What do we want to do? Okay, well, I mean, in the immediate future, we are hopefully, if we can make the schedules work, we'll be bringing you another Christmas special, which will be DM'd by Sam. So we kind of bring out these kind of Harry Potter-ish characters who sort of attend like an adventuring school. And they kind of had a nice little adventure last Christmas. So we're hoping to kind of bring them back. Immediately after that, we'll be doing a very short, tight season, looking at where our heroes are after the end of the second season, which will be, no, I don't want to spoil anything, it's going to be a slightly different game system than what we normally play.
Did you actually take up my little suggestion? Or were you always planning to do that?
I was always planning to.
Cool.
to do something different. So we actually have a different system in mind. If I tell you what the system is, it'll give away what we're doing. So lips are sealed.
He's going to PM it to me because I'm the editor and I need to know this.
Oh, of course. I actually meant to PM this to you like yesterday.
Yeah, they're doing Cyberpunk. They're going Shadowrun. That's what they're doing. That's what I'm hoping. He hasn't told me yet, so I'm just get to speculate and maybe I'm right, and I get to then declare. Go back to that episode. Justin was right. Starfinder. They're doing science fiction space D&D. That's what it is. They're going to Age of Conan. It's John Carter on Mars. They're going to fall in love, all 3 of them, with the same Martian princess. And then they're all going to have to fight, like at the end of every Castle Crashers level, for the kiss of the princess by beating each other to death with their sticks.
Well, I hope this wouldn't be full of spoilers, but I guess you've kind of ruined that now.
Yeah, it's actually just going to be Star Trek. The next season of For Crits and Giggles is actually just a complete rip-off of Star Trek Discovery.
Yeah, we just listened to the first episode of your Session 0, and we're just going to be playing the Klingon.
We're all Klingons instead. Now. Yeah,
we're all Klingons now.
And you know what? The Tieflings can pretend to be Klingons. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
So we're going to be doing a very short season of a different game system to kind of look at that. And once we resolve that little section of the story, to be honest, Mordai, Mithras, and Poe, they've probably got another couple seasons in them. And then we're actually looking to retire those guys and roll up something fresh. We're going to stay in the world of Yanis because we really like it, and I've put way too much time and effort
kind of like The Wire, where
it.
each season was its own focus. Like you just leave those characters and go focus somewhere else.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, and so and the guys are really keen to what with the Christmas special and Borstov and Rat, they definitely want to explore like some other characters, but they're also really keen to kind of see the end of these characters' story.
See it through to the end. Finish what you started.
Yeah. And, really our goal as a podcast, and I think it's been our goal from the start, we're aware of our limitations. We would like to break even on our Patreon, and we would like to put out more episodes more frequently, which I think are some solid and maybe achievable goals.
Absolutely. Zooming out a little bit, just on actual play podcast as a whole, what do you like about that genre of podcasts? Because like this was inspired by another AP that you were listening to, Greetings Adventurers. And what is it about actual play podcasts that you think create a following? If someone's listening to me talking to you right now because they follow me at work and they don't know anything about Dungeons and Dragons, what is it about the actual play format that works so well?
I think there
like there's no wrong answer. I'm just curious to know why do this and not a true crime podcast?
I think there are two things. There are two chemical X's that go into making a really good actual play podcast. And the first one is a good story that feels natural, that feels organic. And, it because of the way the actual plays are and the way that, they're not necessarily scripted as heavily as like a radio drama or something. It feels like the story could go in any direction at any moment. And so when you get those really tight moments, they feel good because it's good story. And when they go totally off the rails, that feels good as well because it's a result of little random factors coming into play. And so I think if you have a really exciting and interesting story, people will really listen for that. But I think the second thing as well, and I hope that we bring this across in our show, is I think people really like listening to friends hanging out, having a really good time. I think if people are playing a game together and they're playing a game together, not just because they're making a podcast, but because they actually just really like spending time with each other and having fun, I think people kind of pick up on that and they in turn have a good time. Me and Nick and Agilin and Sam, we don't hang out and make a podcast because, it's a successful business venture or because we feel like we have to. I hang out with those guys because they're my best friends in the whole world and I just like spending time with them. And so, if they were different people, we would if we weren't doing the podcast, we would still hang out together and we would still have a good time and, joke in the same way that we do now on the show. And I think, when you have a cast that's really like come together and they're friends and they're having a good time, people pick up on that as well. And I think they come back to kind of hear you have fun.
That's really wholesome, Kieran.
Oh, thank you.
Where can people follow you? Let's plug it out. You mentioned they can help you on Patreon. Where can they help you on Patreon? Where can we follow For Crits and Giggles? Where can we subscribe to the show? Where are you online?
Where am I online? Well, you can find me on Twitter. I am at Mr. K_Bennett. I'm actually really close to like 900 followers. I'm only like 20 away. So, should definitely follow me there.
There's at least one of you with 20 accounts who can make that happen.
Please. Oh my God. And then you can also find the show on Twitter. It is at For CNG Podcast. I run that Twitter account as well, so you should follow both of them. And you can also check out our website, which is forcritsandgiggles.com. That has like all of our episodes, and it also has like a big lore section where you can check out art, like full full commissioned art that I've had done of all the gods, main characters, and a handful of the NPCs, and of the main kind of cities in the middle of the world of Yanis. So that's all like really cool stuff that you can go check out. And our Patreon is patreon.com/For Crits and Giggles, where you can get like early access. And I post up all my episode plans. So those are slowly kind of coming out on there as well. So you can look at those. And you also get early access to like lore posts or like bonus episodes that I do as well. And you can also vote on, like what I should kind of write about or do a bonus episode on next. I will say up front, I do not put out content every single month because just life. I have a job. It really gets in the way sometimes. But there is definitely a massive, huge amount of content on that Patreon. And we would really, really appreciate it if you went on there. And there is also another tier as well, where you can join myself, Anna Geelan, and a friend of ours, Thomas, who is also on that tier, and you can play a game of D&D with us, which will be set in the world of the podcast.
Ooh. And I can say, because I mentioned off the top, I've been editing for Crits and Giggles for the last little while. And if you listen to Terrible Warriors, you listen to our Spire campaign that we did earlier this year, those 7 episodes, those were created after I started working with Crits and Giggles. And a lot of what I learned while editing for Kieran's show, I really incorporated into producing Spire. So if you kind of liked how those Spire episodes sounded like, maybe go and listen to Crits and Giggles, because you're going to hear, like especially in the most recent episodes, my own editing and the layering and the production that's gone into it. It also, like, Crits and Giggles is funny, and the chemistry, like, this does sound like the best friends in the world playing games with each other. Like, it's undeniable that this is not just a cast of characters that have come together and a cast of actors or comedians that have come together at the table, but genuine friends who are just rolling dice and having a good time. And so if that's what shines for you when you're listening to an actual play, is that kind of connection to the table, you will find it on Crits and Giggles. So go check them out. This isn't me just spinning my wheels and putting on an interview, but like really I want to help use these spotlights to help direct you to podcasts that I am listening to that I would recommend to you, because I know we're not doing actual plays, and I know that you miss us not doing actual plays this year. So in that meantime, while we're doing our thing, you can go and listen to these other podcasts who are doing their thing, which might be more your thing. And so with that said, Kieran, thank you so much for spending time with me. This was
so
a wonderful little pull back of the curtain into the process of For Crits and Giggles, and I wish you all the well with your events that you're coming up with in the future.
Thank you so much.
And for you, dear listener, thank you for hanging out with us. And we'll be back next week, I think, with another Session Zero. Follow us on Patreon at patreon.com/Terrible Warriors. I've been making weekly public updates, so you can just follow. You don't have to support to see what's been going on. Now, those plans, as you can probably already tell, are subject to change. But it helps you know what I'm planning and preparing for. So I've got plans for next weekend that we're going to record and put out for you again on Tuesday, and I hope it's going to be another Session Zero, and I'm really looking forward to what that game is going to be. So tune in to that next episode, and if you're listening in the past, you won't have to wait very long to find out what game we play. And of course, follow me on Twitter at Dice Warriors, where you can stay up to date on the whole show. And like Kieran, I also have like Mr. Ecock is my own personal account, but I don't really post that nearly as much as right now as I do with Terrible Warriors. So that's it. You can stay up to date on the show, and we'll see you again next week with more of this weird 8th season where we're making things up as we go along. And Kieran, I'm going to, is it tomorrow yet over where you are?
It is tomorrow.
So
yes.
So it's still today here, but it's tomorrow there. So I'm going to leave Kieran in the future. And for you, my dear listener, thank you for joining us. Thank you for, if you found ways to play games this year and play those virtual games and overcome those challenges, kudos to you. This has been a tough year to play our favorite hobby.
Hell yeah.
So thank you for making your games accessible and welcoming and friendly. And until that time where we come back together here at Terrible Warriors, be good to each other.
Hell yeah.
Bye.